This morning we are returning back to the series which we were doing last year, where we were in the book of John, and we're in John chapter 17, which Chikondi read for us. And in that passage, it's an incredible bit actually, because here Jesus is praying, but we are included in his prayer. I don't know if you noticed that as it was read, where he says, "I do not pray just for my disciples, but for those who will come to believe in me through their message." So today we're looking at a prayer Jesus uttered which impacts us, which was about us gathered here today and the church globally around the world throughout all the centuries. But before we look at Jesus' amazing prayer, which, like I say, is about us at one level today, I want to begin by giving you another question, and you were really good at questions earlier. You liked that. And this one is an opportunity for you to advise me and to mock me at the same time. So it's win-win for you. So and I reckon I can predict some of your answers. Let's see how predictable you are. So the question is this: what would I need to do, what would I need to do in order to run a marathon? So I knew the laugh would be the first thing. So if I was going to run a marathon, let's have a picture, Noah, like this. What would I need to do? Train, yeah. Well, I would need to do some exercise. What do you reckon the likelihood of that is? None. Okay, so there, exercise and training. Anything else that I would need to do? Eat more healthily. So anyone got a specific that I shouldn't do anymore? There, I knew someone was going to say that. It's not to Greg's. Anything else that I would need to do? I missed that, sorry. What? Buy a nice vest, yes. And some running shoes. Mike, what was yours? Get someone to run with me, yeah. What? If you had to give it a percentage out of 100, what do you think the likelihood of me ever running a marathon is? 100%. Sorry? Mike's going for 100%. I think he's spiritualizing it. Graham went for 1%. I think Graham is being very optimistic. I think the chance of me running a marathon is absolutely zero. But none of you mentioned one of the things that I thought I would need, which is like this guy up here. I would need a superhero suit. If I'm going to do it, I want to look stupid while I'm doing it. Now, like that exercise, it was all about what would I need to do to run a marathon. And for me, I don't know, it all sounds a little bit tiring, a bit like an incredible commitment. And for me and my particular brain, that's all a little bit overwhelming. I don't think I could ever run a marathon. Now, that's just me. But what if the question I'd asked had been this one? What would I need to do to convince all of us to run a marathon? What would I need to have done then? Now, I think the answers would have possibly been similar, but I think some of you would be thinking, you need to rethink that completely. There's no way I'm going to run a marathon. Some of you would be thinking, okay, I'll be part of a group who might think about it for a while, and others would say about that group, and I would be one of these people, knock yourselves out, you can all run a marathon, but I'm not doing it. Who would be in that group? Yeah, a large number. Now, believe it or not, this does have a bit of a connection to what we're looking at in this incredible passage where Jesus prays for us. Because this is all taking part on the night before the cross. And Jesus has shared a final meal with his disciples. He's washed their feet. He's prayed for himself. He's prayed for his disciples. And then he's turned his attention to us, to people who would believe in him through the message of the disciples. He didn't specifically mention Hadley Baptist Church, but by implication, he's praying about everyone who becomes a believer all through history. And he says this: my prayer is not for them alone. So not just for the disciples he was with, but for those who will believe in me through their message. So that next generation and every generation to follow. And his prayer is this: that all of them might be one, unified in purpose, together, cohesive, as together in purpose and action and in heart and mind as the Father and the Son are. So for us to reflect the same kind of oneness and unity of purpose that God does within himself. And the reason for doing that was the end of verse 21, or verse 22, so that people who are not Christians might believe that Jesus was sent from God. So the whole purpose of him praying this is so that the world looks at us and says and concludes, Jesus has come from God. It's effectively him saying one of, if not the greatest evangelistic witness that he's praying for is for his church to be one all through history. That we should be, and the church should be, a living, breathing, deeply effective, compelling evangelistic event. That's what we should be. That's what Sunday morning should be. So how well are Christians doing with this? How well are we meeting up to Jesus' prayer? Another question for you. So if I was to ask you how many denominations are there, so how many different branches of Christianity worldwide are there, what number would you say? Several hundred from Mike? Any more? And do we think several hundred is about right? Is that where we're going as a group? Sorry? 30,000 from Rob in the balcony. Who thinks Rob's answer is a good one? Yeah, we got. So it's a brilliant answer. So the actual estimate is 45,000. Now, that's astounding, isn't it? 45,000 little groups that see Christianity differently, that worship differently, that might value one another differently. 45 little groups where some of them might work really well together and others would think, I'm not even sure they're Christians, and maybe they aren't. But we're not doing particularly well, are we, in terms of Jesus' prayer? He prays for us to be one, and in 2,000 years, we've made that 45,000. It's not going particularly well in terms of this prayer being fulfilled. Christianity, by and large, has been really good at splintering and defining against others who is in and who is out. So you can be part of groups and they'll say, here is our statement on X, Y, and Z. And if you sign up to all of those things, you're in our gang, and if you don't, you're not. And sometimes those things are good and helpful, and sometimes less so. So you'll get people who say, these denominations are okay to work with, but you're not working with these ones because we don't really like what they stand for. And again, sometimes that makes sense. But when we think about, okay, then how do we work together? Quite often it gets narrowed down to what are the core things that we all believe? And for me, that feels a bit like the Smartie game with flour. Anyone played the Smartie game with flour? You get a big bowl of flour, you put a Smartie on the top, and you cut bits away, and the idea is to not make the Smartie full. So you get something smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. I think when we say, okay, let's get down to the very core stuff that we all agree on, we make this prayer seem really small. We make it seem like Jesus is saying, narrow down, narrow down, narrow down. And it leaves us not really with something we can take away. It turns it all into a bit of an academic exercise. So if we were to do that, we could then today come up with a list of all the groups that we as a church could work with. Here are the things we believe. Here are all the ones that we can't. I'm going to go much smaller than that today. We're going to think about what Jesus' prayer means for us in this room. Because the big talk about all the groups that we could work with, for me, is like trying to convince us all to run a marathon. It's not really going to go anywhere. We're just going to concentrate on us today. What others do with Jesus' prayer is up to them. This is where we're going today. So, as we go through John's Gospel, and hopefully this has come out a little bit in some of the small group notes recently, one of the themes that emerges is that there's often an invitation to come and see Jesus, to come to him and to encounter him. So when one of the first disciples is called, when he shows a little bit of an interest in who Jesus is, Jesus' words are, come and see, come and see. When Philip, one of Jesus' disciples, talks to his mate Nathanael about Jesus, and Nathanael's got some questions. What does Philip say? He says, come and see. When the Samaritan woman at the well wants to get the village that has possibly shunned her for years to come and check Jesus out, what does she say? come and see. Over and over again, sometimes from Jesus' own lips, is this little phrase, come and see. Jesus says, come to me if you're hungry and thirsty, and I will satisfy you. Come to me if you are thirsty, and I'll give you something which will satisfy your soul. And that's really important, because what Jesus is saying in that is, Christianity is a cerebral faith. It is one to do with your brain, but it isn't totally to do with your brain. He was offering an invitation for people to come and know him and experience him and be transformed by him and his words, and in doing so get to know God. And so Jesus' prayer is about making sure this come to me thing is continued. His prayer is that once he's died, and once he's been resurrected, and once he's returned to heaven, there are a group of people about whom it can be said, I came to them, I saw them, and I encountered Jesus there. His prayer is that through his followers and through all of history and here today, that his people are a mirror that reflects him to the world around them. So his prayer, you could paraphrase it like this. His prayer is that this church in Hadley are known as people who show the world what Jesus is like. That's what he wants us to be. And that's where verse 21 comes in. Jesus says that his prayer is that all of them may be one, just as he and his Father are one. That the world might believe that God the Father has sent him. I don't know about you though. Phrases like one as the Father and Son are one, I find sometimes they're a bit confusing. Is it just me who feels that way? Sometimes, especially in John's Gospel at times when Jesus is talking about something, I find it quite puzzling what he's talking about. Now, as we thought last week, when it says that God is one, it's not a numerical thing. This is all about unity. Well, it is and it isn't. He is one, but it's more than that. There is a unity of purpose. All through Jesus' life, he had one overriding guiding principle. He was going to do whatever pleased his Father. He was one with his Father's wishes. He loved him. There was nothing in the Father and Son's relationship where they were at odds with one another. They were both laser focused on what they had to do. And that's what Jesus is praying, that we would be of one purpose, that we would have certain things that shape all that we are and all that we do. And I think to help us get this and to make it less just a concept, we need to look at where Jesus says something really, really similar. And we looked at this earlier. In John 13, on the same evening as he says, be one so the world knows, he says, a new commandment I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know. By this, the world will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. They're two very, very similar phrases. Be one, and the world will know. Love one another, and the world will know. These two things are different, but they're wrapped up inside each other. Jesus is saying that he wants his people to be a community that draws people towards faith. And that little phrase where he says, as I have loved you, you must love one another, is absolutely key. The night Jesus said those words, he did something utterly remarkable for the world that he lived in. He, as their leader and their teacher, undressed to the waist and washed their feet. That was an example of what it meant to love one another. He made himself look like the most menial and the lowest slave there could be to serve his friends. And he told them, do stuff like that for each other. John describes this as him showing them the full extent of his love. And it starts there and it goes all the way to the cross. He's prepared to go to the very depths to love other people. He'll put all of his rights to one side for the benefit of others. And that's his prayer, that we would mirror that we would be like him, that this would be a community of people where we are trying to outdo one another in being compassionate towards one another, where there is genuine interest in knowing each other and caring for each other. So much so that when people encountered us here on a Sunday and were amongst us, they would think, Jesus really is God. That's a thought, isn't it? How they encounter us here would make them think Jesus is God. So the big question for us, I think, is before we think about the church globally being one, we need to think about how we here can be like what Jesus wants us to be. Love one another as I have loved you, and the world will know. In 1989, there was a film starring Kevin Costner where he builds a baseball pitch in the middle of his farm. Not a great farming decision, I would have thought. But he's doing it because he's got this voice in his head that is saying, build it and they will come, or build it and he will come. And so he thinks, if I build this thing, then people will come. And at times, what Christians have done with this is we've taken it to be, we've used this as an illustration, I've seen it done, and we've used it to talk about facilities and worship style and getting a good, eloquent speaker who doesn't mess up the notices to speak. And they say, build a great building and people will come. Have great worship and people will come. Have a much better speaker and people will come. Jesus says, be like me together and it will draw people in. It won't matter what your building's like. It won't necessarily matter what your worship's like. If you love one another, people will come. That's what he seems to be saying. But what does it look like? What does it look like? Well, I think we get little glimmers of it through the Bible. We get little hints of what it looks like when the church does it. And we see this in the book of Acts and through some of the letters. So in Acts chapter 2, when Peter has done this incredible sermon and 3,000 people have become followers of Jesus, we read about what they're like. And it says this, that they are a group of people who have everything in common. They're one. They're one. And what do? They care for each other. They share their possessions. They break bread in their homes. They rejoice with glad and sincere hearts. They enjoy the favor of all the people. They share their stuff with one another. And what does it say? The Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. If you love one another, the world will see who Jesus is. There you have it, written in the Bible itself as to what it looks like. And it's an amazing thing. It would have been an amazing thing. Jewish people did not, as a rule, even go into a house of non-Jews and eat with them. They just didn't do it. When they become followers of Christ, that all changes. It doesn't matter anymore. When Peter went and ate with Gentiles, initially it was like, what on earth are you doing? But then this is why they did it, so that they would be one. There were so many centuries of animosity between Jews and Samaritans that rabbis, religious people would say Samaritan women were unclean from birth. That's how much they hated one another. When they become followers of Jesus, that all gets blown away, and a community which has no racial prejudice is gone. There would be communities where a slave owner would accept a runaway slave back as a beloved brother. All because of what Jesus had done. That drew people in to find out more. And they found out who Jesus was, that he was the Savior of the world. So the question for us maybe is this: how can we become more like them? Because if I was to stand here now, up here and say, sell all your possessions and give us the money, that probably wouldn't be an overly wise thing. But what can we do? Well, I'm going to give you a few little suggestions. So here's one. We are told in the Bible to bear one another's burdens, and in doing so, we fulfill the law of Christ. I think we've got a slide for that, and we know. Let's have that, yeah. So carry one another's burdens, and in this way, you will fulfill the law of Christ. It's linking very much to what Jesus said. Love one another was the new command he gave. That's the law. That was his new commandment. He's saying, carry each other's burdens out of gratitude to God for what Jesus has done, and people will see, and it might draw them in to find out who Jesus is. So, show of hands. Who would be inclined to bear the burdens of someone else in this room? Who would be prepared to do that? Not many hands going up. So we would, as a group of people, we would say, I would give up my time and I would give up some level of inconvenience to carry someone else's burdens to care for them. Another show of hands. Who's prepared to share their burdens? Who's prepared to share them? We're less keen to do that, aren't we? We're less keen to do that. So if you want to be people to bear your burdens, you've got to share them. If you want to bear someone else's in the future, you've got to be prepared to share them. People can't help carry what they don't know. People can't bear what you don't share. There's a little bit of an encouragement there for us as a group of people to perhaps be prepared to say, you know what, I'm struggling and I need someone to help me. And then someone else to say, I can help you with that. I can help you with that. We're told, out of gratitude to Christ, to encourage one another in our walk with Jesus. Who likes encouragement? Who likes to be encouraged? I like to be encouraged. When's the last time you encouraged the good that you saw someone else do? These are things that we're told to do. So I think there's a slide for that one as well, isn't there? No. Let us encourage. In Hebrews it says, let us encourage one another daily. Daily. We should encourage. You see someone do something which you think God would be pleased about, encourage them. That's a really good thing to do. Jesus tells people to lay down their lives metaphorically and sacrifice for others. These are the sort of things he wants us to do. How inclined are we to do that? That's the question that comes out of this. How inclined are we to do these things? And perhaps we need to think about the why. Why do we do these things? And actually, there's part of Jesus' prayer where he says, you should do these things because I've passed the baton to you. So when you look at verse 22, he says, I have given them the glory that you gave me, that they may be one as we are one, I in them and you in me, so that they may be brought to complete unity. For me, that's one of those verses I get confused about with the I in them and you in me and all of that. But what's it saying? Jesus is saying he's given us, the church, his glory. That's quite confusing, isn't it? How has Jesus given us his glory? Do you shine? Do you shine? I don't shine. What does it mean for Jesus to say, I have given you my glory? Well, it's passed the baton on. If you were to go back up to verse 4 in this same chapter, Jesus says to his Father, I have brought you glory by completing the work you gave me. In, I think it's chapter 15, Jesus says, this is to my Father's glory that you bear much fruit. Glory in the Bible was historically where God's presence was. So in front of the people in the Old Testament, there was a cloud of glory. When Solomon finished his temple, that cloud of glory goes into the temple. And then when Jesus walks the earth, that's where God's glory was. Now he's saying his glory, his place where he's specially present and specially doing things, is where his people are. Is where his people are. Not in a shiny, special way. No clouds here. Judging by some televangelists, it's all in the teeth. It's all in the teeth. But what Jesus is saying is, we show his glory when we are what he calls us to be. When we become a community that astonishes people with love. This week, I'm gathering together the people who want to be part of our events team. And I'm really looking forward to that. And as good as the events that those people plan, as good as those events are, this passage says to us, the greatest event for bringing people to Jesus is this. It's what we do when we gather on Sundays. How we relate to one another. So you're all part of the events team. You're all part of it. Each week, let's make it a good one. Let's make it a good one. And one last thing before we close. Why should we do this? Because the things that we've talked about this morning, they're quite inconvenient. They impact the diary and all of those sort of things. Well, if you look at verse 24, you get something really, really profound. As Jesus begins his prayer, begins to close his prayer, he says, Father, I want those you have given me to be with me where I am and to see my glory. Jesus wants us to one day be with him in all of his glory. He's going to do everything he can to make it possible for us to see him face to face. That's quite a good reason for doing what he says. And he's made it possible. In the Old Testament, Moses was told, no one can see the face of God and live. Jesus makes it possible. How? Because he dies in our place. Moses was told, you can't see God or you'll die. You're too messed up. God's too perfect. Jesus says, I can see God's face, but I'll die so that you can too. He says, I'll be excluded so you can be included. He says, I'll take your curse so you can have my blessing. That's why we should love one another, because that's the depth to which God has loved us. So today and for the weeks to come, let's make Sunday the best event that we put on, the one which draws people towards Christ. Let's be the community he wants us to be. Let's show people how amazing Jesus is. We're going to pray, and then we're going to sing. Father God, we would ask that we would take on board the words of Jesus, that we would love one another the way that you have loved us, that we would see the depths that you went to. We would see the sacrifice you made. We would see just how much of a servant you were to make us yours. And we ask that we might mirror that to the best of our ability to the world around us. So help us to be a group of people that bears one another's burdens, that encourages each other, that does whatever we can to be a witness to the world by what we do. Help us, we pray. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.